Well, look at that. Pentium 133 MHz. That means this is one of the very first VAIO 505s, released exclusively in Japan in 1997. Come and time travel with me tonight back to the 1990s as we look at this magnificent computer.
It's a Sony.
This is a beautiful machine. I'm so excited to be getting this working. When it came out, the 505 cost 300,000 yen, which is about $5,000 in today's money. This was 1997, when Sony were developing their first ultra-thin laptop to be released worldwide the following year, shortly after the release of Windows 98. These global market models started with the Pentium running at 200 MHz and went up from there the following years. But anything below 200 MHz indicates a Japanese test market model. These were sold running on Windows 95, with the Pentium 133 being the very earliest revision of all. I think this might be not just the best laptop of the 1990s, but a strong contender to be the best device released during the whole decade. Though IBM enthusiasts might disagree on these claims, let me know below. I've been collecting non-working examples from Japan for quite a while. Getting the 505 in working condition can be quite expensive. So I've elected to pick up broken ones really cheaply over the years. In the 2000s, I actually had a working second-hand 505 before the police took it and broke it open to get the hard drive out. The main issue with the ones I have here seems to be the mainboards that won't power up properly. The lights come on, but I can't get to the BIOS screen. And some of these LCDs seem to have problems, so I've ended up with a lot of broken stuff. Maybe with the money I've spent on these non-working ones, I could have just bought one good one. But where's the fun in that? I love the thrill of getting something working. Also, I probably wouldn't have had the surprise of finding this really early mainboard revision. There's just so many bodge wires all over this thing. And through-hole resistors added in different places. I've counted maybe up to a dozen or so bodges. These modifications are also called engineering change orders, or ECOs in the industry. While making this video, I found a paper called A Case Study of Sony's VAIO Laptop by Yasuyuki Motoyama. It's all about the design and the manufacturing of the original VAIO 505. This paper describes a product built more like a prototype that never stopped evolving until the last possible moment. It was a trial and error, cut and try process. A change in one component caused snowballing changes in other components. It was an extremely tedious and lengthy process to go over every one of the 1,100 components. Looking at one of the other mainboards I have, this one partially powers up with lights, but doesn't start up. Probably from this battery corrosion on the board near the memory chips. I really want to take the heatsink off the CPU on this board and have a look. Taking the heat pad off the CPU, and there we can see this is a 166 MHz version of the Pentium. That indicates this is another early Japanese revision of the 505, but probably from early 1998 instead of 1997. That's such a weird package for the Pentium. It's obviously intended for ultra-thin laptop designs. Almost all the chips are flat inline packages, except for these two Intel chipset chips that are ball grid array. This is very early for BGA chip design. And there's no bodges on this one. This looks much closer to a final version. There's also been a lot of change in this area here, which when comparing to the older revision, we can see a lot of unpopulated chip spaces. I wonder what Sony were thinking they were going to use this area for. There's the ESS audio drive sound chip. This is capable of up to Sound Blaster Pro 2 compatibility, including FM synthesis. It's quite decent for the time. There's also a NeoMagic Magic Graph 128ZV graphics chip. It's got 1 MB of fast graphics RAM built in. As this laptop was only designed for business class software, fast 2D graphics is all it really needs. So this chip has no inbuilt 3D graphics abilities, but that doesn't mean we won't try. There's the 32 megabytes of RAM, more than enough for Windows 95. I'm both surprised and pleased that the only mainboard that I have in working condition is such an early revision. I'm eager to assemble this into a working computer, using all the best parts that I have from all these broken units. Notice just how thin this design is. That red coil, for example, would normally make this much thicker. But Sony specifically made a board cutout for the coil to fit in. That coil looks like it's being used for the inbuilt modem telephone interface. This computer is way before Wi-Fi existed. There are only two built-in connectivity options, those being infrared and telephone modem. I'm really concerned about this hard drive connector cable. The pins on the back seem to go right up against the main board, and even seem to be touching these purple capacitors. I'm actually a bit worried about that. Okay, let's add a hard drive. The original hard drive was a 1GB, 2.5-inch mechanical drive, just like the one I have here, though this is a 2GB example. I'm not sure this drive even works, but that's okay because I've decided to use a compact flash to IDE adapter. These are passive devices and rely on the compact flash card having enough IDE compatibility built in to work properly. For the card, I'm using this Swissbit industrial 4GB card. I have actually tried this card on a previous laptop, the Toshiba Libretto, but I was having problems booting from it in that video. I've since worked out that's likely because I got these cards with a strange partition setup on them that have to be completely wiped before using them in retro computers. I'm glad I've worked this out because I have quite a few of them. I'm also going to put some insulation tape on that connector. Assembly was not too awkward. I'm finding myself taking 2 steps forward, 1 step backward each time to get everything together in just the right order. There's a service manual showing a view of the internals, but I prefer careful observation of each step. It's more fun like this and much more hands-on. The keyboard has a lot of Japanese characters all over it, including some dedicated Japanese keys that I have no idea what they do. Getting these ribbon cables in is definitely a bit tricky, but as long as I'm careful and I go slowly, it's really no problem. It's now time to get some of these screws back in. At this point, I want to do a quick power-up test. Okay, we're still looking good. Okay, there's the plastic covers that go over the hinge sections. And finally, a cylindrical battery. This, of course, would be completely dead by now. Most likely this contains 3 18650 lithium-ion cells, and I'm wondering how easy would they be to replace. It looks like I forgot to put the infrared cover back in. I will need to do a lot of disassembly to get this back in, so for the time being I'm going to leave it out until I know this machine fully works. Another thing I'm going to do is upgrade the RAM to 64 megabytes using these 2 additional RAM modules that came out of one of the later broken units that I have. That means this machine won't have the original configuration of the 1997 model, but it's a nice quality of life improvement. And with the compact flash card running as a hard drive, this won't exactly have the original configuration and performance anyway. We've got a BIOS and it's detecting the compact flash card as a hard drive. It's now time to install an operating system. And to install this, I have the original PCMCIA CD-ROM drive from Sony. The first operating system I've decided to install is the original Japanese release of Windows 95 made for this specific model from the original Sony install disk. And I'm so pleased that someone has uploaded an image of this to the Internet Archive. Okay, I've burnt the ISO to a rewritable CDR. The system boots and seems to be working fine from this CDRW disk. I'm going to be able to see what this machine was like when it first came out in Japan in 1997. The installation procedure is all in Japanese, which, while I'm getting used to dealing with this in small doses, this is a lot more text than I'm used to, so I'm translating my way through all of this. I've been having so many problems with optical drives in recent years that it's slowed down my ability to finish many videos. Many are still sitting in production. I'm really pleased that all of this just works. These early VAIOs can only boot from original Sony PCMCIA CD-ROM drives. Also, these original Sony installer discs install Windows 95 in a non-standard way. It's all very proprietary. My first attempt went through the entire process, but it didn't actually boot. I think this is a problem with the way I first used F-Disk. A Windows 95 setup is not used to working with multi-gigabyte sized drives. I considered my options and I read through some of the posts on Vogons and eventually settled on extended F-Disk or XF-Disk to set up and format partitions on my compact flash card. I did a quick test with MS-DOS 6.22, which I was able to install and get booting MS-DOS working from the compact flash. Okay, I should have no problems getting this to work now. So here we go. The install seems to have gone well. Let's reboot and see what we've got. Oh, and look at that. Apparently I need an OEM key. Of course, I didn't get anything else with this machine. Okay, Windows 95, here's an OEM key. And there we have it, an original 1997 VAIO 505 with the original Japanese Windows 95 installation, just as I've seen it in Sony's early promotional materials. Sony have added quite a number of interesting looking VAIO apps. I'm really curious what they all do. I'm deliberately not translating, just enjoying seeing them. It's really giving me that wonderful mid-90s feel. I've decided I want to keep this laptop as a time capsule of the mid-90s.
No way.
But while I love this, and I'll be keeping this operating system on here, I do also need something in English to make this machine more usable for me. If I had somehow managed to get one of these in late 1997, I would have installed an English version of Windows 95. But I like to imagine that I would have been tempted to install a beta version of Windows 98 from late 1997. So that's what I'm going to do. Call me crazy, because maybe this will be filled with bugs, but it would have been an amazing thing to have at the time. And that's exactly what I want to experience now. So back to extended F-Disk, and I'm creating a second 1GB partition. While I was burning an ISO of the Windows 98 beta, I tried an official Sony Windows 98 install disk for the 505. But because of Sony's model checking, it won't even start the installation process. The next problem then comes from booting the burnt Windows 98 installation CD. Because Windows 98 simply doesn't have the boot drivers for Sony's PCMCIA interface or this CD-ROM drive. I could get this to work by modifying the Windows 98 MS-DOS boot process to include DOS-based PCMCIA and CD-ROM drivers for this Sony CD-ROM drive. But I've decided on a much easier method. I'm simply going to create yet another partition on the hard drive. and then use the Japanese Windows 95 that's already installed on here to copy the Windows 98 installer files onto this spare partition. So now I just need to boot from the CD again, but with the new partition set active in XFdisk. In MS-DOS, I can go to the partition where the Windows 98 installer files are saved, and I can start the process manually. It's really nice to see the Windows 98 setup process again. It also seems to be running through a bit faster because I'm installing from a solid-state drive to a solid-state drive without any slowdowns from CD-ROMs or mechanical hard drives. One of the problems with beta versions of Windows is that they are date limited to disable themselves past a certain date. But with the BIOS and clock battery now removed for good, the date always resets to default each time the laptop is powered. This is a nice unexpected hack that will make this beta version of Windows work forever on here. After about half an hour, the Windows 98 install seemed to go really well. It's booting, and I've got Windows 98 running on here. Installing the drivers is also really easy. The original installer CDs all seem to have a VAIO drivers folder on them that's easily accessible. I just need to use the device manager and install each driver one by one. I can now run the display at its full 800 by 600 resolution with 16 million colours. This is such an awesome computer. It feels like hanging out in the 1990s in a combi van with the Doctor and Tuvok and Tom.
And you, Mr. Leisure Suit.
There's a name I hadn't considered.
Rain, I'm sorry you got dragged into all this.
Aye, Captain. Tuvok out. Mr. Starling is under control. I suggest you return to ChronoWorks and continue the business there. The Doctor and I must make our way to Arizona.
I've also set Windows 98 to not automatically start on boot. Instead, I like to boot directly to an MS-DOS prompt, and I can start Windows anytime with the Win command. But starting directly with MS-DOS is very convenient, as most games from this period were exclusively DOS-based. One of the games I first thought about trying on here is Descent 2. With MS-DOS and Windows 98 all working, I've decided to keep going with this time capsule idea. I'm going to use the remaining free space on the hard drive for another partition and install Windows NT 4. This OS came out in 1996, and I've always wanted to try this operating system for myself. Of course, I don't expect the Windows NT installed CD to boot, but I still want to see what happens if I try. And there it goes, a nice Windows NT crash log. So, like before, I'm copying the installer files to the spare partition, and I'm trying to get the installation process started from DOS. But this is where I run into some major problems. First, I need the lock command to bypass the use of long file names in DOS. This wasn't a big issue, but because I'm not at all familiar with the NT installation process, I'm just doing my best at each step. But it seems I've killed my newly installed Windows 98 partition in the process. This is a learning process, especially the first time doing something like this. But that's still not the biggest problem. The biggest problem is yet to come. I'm able to get the Windows NT installer to start. It started copying files and installing Windows NT onto the partition. Everything was going well, or so I thought. When I went to boot the newly installed NT partition, it simply refused to boot. A bit of searching around and reading yet again on Vogons, and I found the answer. It turns out that Windows NT 4 can only boot from a partition that's located on the first 1024 cylinders on a hard disk drive. And my Swissbit compact flash card I've installed in this machine is telling the BIOS that it has 8,192 cylinders. That means I'd only be able to boot Windows NT if it was within the first 500 megabytes of this memory card. So to get Windows NT working on here, I would have to completely rearrange all the partitions. That's not something I really want to do right now. There are some other potential methods I've heard, such as using the Grub bootloader can bypass problems like this. If anyone has any experience with the best way to handle this, then let me know in the comments. For now though, I'm just going to stick with the older extended F-disk method of booting Windows 95 and 98. I'll just have to forego trying Windows NT4 for the time being. And I've still got that damaged Windows 98 partition. I've decided that the easiest solution is just to simply reinstall Windows 98. This is how I'm mostly going to use this machine anyway, so a nice fresh install is a good place to start. It's quick, only takes about half an hour, and then the drivers only take a couple of minutes to get working again. I'm going to bask in the glow of Windows 98 on vintage hardware. This is a time machine that takes me back to the mid-90s. This machine will be replacing my Toshiba Protégé that you might have seen in many earlier videos. I've had this since the early days of the channel. Unfortunately, I had to stop using the Toshiba a couple of years ago when the LCD started to develop vinegar syndrome. This is when the LCD polarizing layer glues begin to break down. Once started, the process can't be stopped, and it looks terrible. I was so disappointed because I'd finally gotten a port replicator for my Protégé and only used it in 3 videos before the LCD began to degrade. Since then, I've been using this later Z505 VAIO model. It's quite a bit bigger than the original 505. I like it, but I much prefer the original 505. Also, the hard drive in this later Z505 is beginning to fail. It often doesn't spin up, and it will need a replacement at some point. But this original VAIO 505 is a wonderful replacement, and yes, I do have a port adapter that I got with one of the broken units. I'm really pleased with the outcome of all this work tonight. This is not just my favourite laptop of the 90s, but probably my favourite device of the entire 1990s. I especially love the prototype feel of the example I have. And of course, I'm going to use this for retro gaming and checking out scene demos from the early to mid-90s. This was 30 years ago. When we consider how challenging this must have been to do at the time, especially compared to today, when even something like a single AirPod has 1,000 times the computational power of this entire laptop. I do wonder though, how are things going to change now that we have AI doing most of the coding work on the planet? How is the demo scene going to deal with all this? If you enjoyed this video, I would certainly appreciate a thumbs up. Thank you to all my supporters for your help in keeping these videos flowing. I am grateful for anything that you give. And thank you to everyone for being here. But that's it for the moment, and I'll see you next time.